Thank you very much for coming to our GHIPP 25th special dialogue hosted by Global Health Innovation Policy Program at GRIPS. And my name is Hiromi Murakami. I'm very privileged to organize and facilitating this series. Thank you very much. And we initiated this dialogue series in 2020 in response to the challenge that we faced by COVID-19. And since then, we have expanded our scope to address various issues, including health crisis, security threats, economic and political disruptions. Today, we're very honored to have special guest, U.S. Ambassador Ralm Emanuel, who will be sharing insights on regional security challenges. And we extend our gratitude to U.S. Embassy of Tokyo and Ambassador Emanuel for your generous support for our Japan's Challenge Dialogue, which is resuming from this fall. As you know, COVID and the conflict in Ukraine have changed the landscape and the underlying assumptions, and we really need to reevaluate the existing frameworks. For that reason, it is critical to continue our discussion. So our director, Dr. Kiyoshi Kurokawa, has a deep admiration for Ambassador Emanuel, and he'll have the privilege of introducing Ambassador shortly. But before Dr. Kurokawa, let me introduce Dr. Michishita, Narushige Michishita. He's a Vice President of GRIPS and Deputy Director of Global Leadership Department Program, and he's a specialist in Japanese security and foreign policy, as well as security issues on the Korean Peninsula. Now let me turn to Professor Emeritus Kiyoshi Kurokawa, who is not only a passionate leader, but also has chaired numerous institutions, including Science Council of Japan and Diet Investigation Committee for the Fukushima Nuclear Power Plant incident, and currently he serves as the Vice Chair of the World Dementia Council. With that, I will now pass the microphone to Dr. Kiyoshi Kurokawa for his welcoming remarks. Dr. Kiyoshi Kurokawa, please come up to the podium.
To make some strong message for all of us in Japan. And this is my distinct honor to welcome Ambassador Ralm Emanuel to this symposium or special dialogue. A prominent leader with a track record of shaping policy and enabling missions of both national and municipal levels, Ambassador Emanuel's dynamic career speaks for itself. I know that, having held critical roles such as White House Chief of Staff under President Barack Obama, Mayor of Chicago, and Senior Advisor to the President Bill Clinton, his expertise has been instrumental in navigating complex legislative and policy challenges. In fact, he has been, in my view, enabler of the head of your company, your state, big state, because that's big. And President has many missions, but you have been an enabler of the mission. That's my admiration to you. Thank you for coming again. That was his leadership. Directly translate the big issue as a president of the United States, and he's really made it possible to have this mission possible. Ambassador Emanuel's unwavering commitment to public service, consensus building, skills, and decisive leadership continue to drive progress in the international affairs and continue to make social betterment. We eagerly anticipate the valuable insight he will share during this special dialogue. I really admire you as a big enabler of the big institution or the top from the president. I really admire your skill set. Great. Welcome to this group.
Thank you for that introduction. I appreciate it. I'll make sure that you have my mother's phone number so you can call her and let her know. I do want to pick up on a little of what you said about COVID and also the conflict, because I've said before and what I believe, which is there have been 3 C's in the last 3 years that have changed the world: COVID, conflict, and coercion. And every country and every society is adjusting, as you noted, their frameworks, their strategic outlook, because of those 3 C's. And we're literally in the beginning stages of that adjustment. This is my 3rd speech, 3rd and final, and I want to thank you for letting me participate in your forum and your speaking process and commission. Obviously, this is an ongoing process. The first speech I gave was at Tokyo University. It was on economic coercion, and it was prior to the Hiroshima G7 summit. And it was about the history and the practices of economic coercion by China. Japan was the first country, as it related to rare earth materials and minerals, to be targeted. Korea in 2017, the Philippines, Lithuania, and Australia. In each case, economic coercion is using an economic tool to enforce a political outcome and to restrict another country's political independence or political agency. Each country in that situation, and we chronicled it in that speech, whether it was the Republic of Korea making a decision as it related to the deployment of THAAD, dealing with its own security related to North Korea, or Australia asking the, God forbid, the question, what was the origin of COVID, and let's get to the bottom of it. Or Lithuania as it related to their position on Taiwan. But in each case, that country economically was targeted. And make no doubt about it, economic coercion by China is the most persistent and pernicious tool in their economic toolbox. The second speech at Sophia University was about debt trap and the countries that have been ensnarled in China's debt trap. It is again, first these loans are given and promised as part of economic development, and then they become ensnarled and entrapped in China's economic and fiscal and financial web. In each situation, those countries lose their economic and political, economic in certain cases, meaning their infrastructure, whether they're ports, airports, railway, they lose them, and they also become majorly indebted to China. And in the process, they lose both their economic and political independence and agency and sovereignty. The debt trap and coercion are different tools. The objective is the same. And now, a decade later, as it relates to Fukushima, we're back at economic coercion by China. I say that by way is because just a little while ago, we released pictures of a Chinese fishing boat in Japan's EEZ, fishing for the same fish that are embargoed by Japan. I'm glad you appreciate the humor. Now, I suppose I could ask, since China's decided to continue to fish in Japan's EEZ, but embargoed all the fish off the coast of Japan, for a show of hands of how many believe that this embargo has something to do with public health and public safety and the well-being, since the very fish that are being caught on that ship right now will be served in China. I'm open to any show of hands that believe that this is really about public health and about the well-being of of the Chinese people, or something to do with scientifically based area. Now, the irony is that fish and the fish in that trawler, and that happens every day in the Japanese waters. China is engaged right now in fishing off of Japan's waters while they are simultaneously engaged in a unilateral embargo of Japan's fish. The intention was to isolate Japan. And my belief is China is being isolated. And that effort. Second is, I do want us all, before I get on to the main part, is to take a question and relate back. And that is, Fukushima happened a decade ago. COVID happened a little over 3 years, 4 years ago. You're going to have an incident. They're both, God forbid what happened, 100-year public health problem as related to COVID. An incident in Fukushima had consequences here in Japan. Something will happen in the future around the world. The question we all have to ask is, which set of protocols do you want another country to adopt and follow? In the case of Fukushima, Japan was scientifically based, internationally cooperative and collaborative, and fully transparent. There is nothing related to COVID from China that is internationally collaborative and cooperative, transparent, and based on science. There is still information the world does not know. And in the future, there will be an incident. There will be a moment where something horrific will happen. And the question before all of us, an international institution, and when it comes to leadership in the world, do you want another country to follow the practices and protocols adopted by Japan, or the practices and protocols adopted by China? As it relates to the debt trap, in each of these situations, China does not participate in the OECD and international system and following the rules and the level of transparency that other countries adopt. And a lot of headache would be avoided if China did that. And in each of the situations, whether that's in the case of Sri Lanka and their port, Zambia and their power infrastructure, Ecuador and their hydroelectric dam, in each of those situations, the international community, the IMF and the World Bank, are called to extend loans and help countries deal with the debt that they've incurred in those situations. And in many countries, not limited there, they lose control and ownership of the very infrastructure and investment that they've taken. Their political sovereignty, economic independence, is now being ensnarled in the financial and economic web of China. And in many situations, not all of them, because of the stress of paying back China, it leads to political instability, as you've seen in Sri Lanka, as we've seen in Pakistan. So in those situations, again, politics is the end goal. Control or dominance or inability or to attempt to hinder another country's political independence, and using economic tools or financial tools to achieve those political objectives. And in each case, whether in the areas of coercion or debt trap, the international community or international rules come to the savior. How did Australia survive 3 years of COVID kind of economic embargoes, economic restraint, economic coercion? Because they had many other economic relationships. How did Lithuania deal with China's coercion? They were part of the EU. They were part of a greater economic system that they could rely on. So confronting coercion, as the G7 did here in Hiroshima for the first time ever, is key to pushing back on one of the most persistent and pernicious economic tools in China's toolbox. And when it comes to going forward, as it relates to the debt trap from China, making sure that countries know the small print, making sure they understand the full obligations that will come, so they don't lose either the investment, their economic independence, or their political agency in that process. And again, as I said earlier, in many times, China takes possession of those key strategic infrastructure assets. And this all brings us up to this point here, which is the issue as it relates to the regional behavior by China in this area of the Indo-Pacific. How they enforce, through either force, belligerence, or aggression, their view of the world. Now, in other places, I have talked about kind of three concentric circles for China. The core is a relationship between the PRC and the Chinese people, what I call the calm circle, where they try to ensure that there's a belief in the Chinese dream. The PRC is given authority and power based on the premise that you will also get prosperity. That is under tremendous stress right now. The second circle is a regional one, which I called the conflict circle. First one is calm, the outer circle is conflict, is a relationship with countries in the region. And then the third outer circle is what I refer to as the charm circle, where they're just refer to themselves as a benign player looking for economic relationships with countries and peoples around the world. And in this region, the conflict region, China has put out, as recently as the end of August, early September, a new map. And in that map, they have given you their view of the world, their view, rather, of the region. They have done this before. In this map, you have had situations and places where Japan, India, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, even Russia, have raised objections to that map. Now, the difference is they have presented this map in the past. The difference is it's a playbook in which they're running that play right now. From the Himalayan mountaintops to the islands off of Philippines, they are in one way or another in conflict with countries trying to make that map a reality, trying to enforce it piece by piece. Now, I happen to think the Prime Minister's speech in Shangri-La was correct and succinct and had foresight in 2022 when he said, today's Ukraine can become tomorrow's Indo-Pacific. And what we do matters. And I say that by way of there's a pattern here, a clear pattern, whether with India, whether with the Philippines on the Thomas Shoal, whether in Japan's EEZ, whether in Vietnam or Malaysia. If you look at it, there's a ring of aggression going back. There's been over since 2021, 60 registered conflicts between Chinese ships and other ships. Philippines, just as recently as the other day, but going back to 2016, the International Court ruled on behalf of the Philippines on their decision, and China's ignored the International Court. Malaysia in 2021, as related to their state energy firm, involved in the exploration activities, and Chinese vessels try to disrupt that. 2014, Vietnam faced challenges when China was trying to, the drilling rig was harassed by the Chinese Coast Guard. India, as recently as just 9 months ago, on their border with China. There is a pattern here as it relates to both the map, their view of the world, and their aggression. Now, this is important for all of us because also in 2015, in the Rose Garden, China declared that we would never militarize the South China Sea. And since that time, nearly 3,200 acres have been, in fact, exactly that, militarized. And this is all the more important because while it's important to study what's happening on the battlefield right now in Ukraine, in eastern Ukraine, tactics, weapons, it's also important to study what happened before then and what did happen. Obviously, President Putin said Ukraine doesn't exist. He has a view also of a map of countries or not countries on his border, on the border rather of Russia, and is willingly to do certain things to enforce that. And we stand here today because this is not just another map. There's a series of actions taken by China. And that means what in those years between 2007 and Putin's speech, in 2020, Putin's speech, President Putin's speech in the Munich Defense Conference, to the starting of the war on the Ukrainian border in 2021 and also in 2014 on Crimea, what could have been effective and credible deterrence? And that's the question today. And studying not just what's happening now, but what did and did not happen before then is critical to understanding what, as the Prime Minister noted, how to ensure that what happens today in Ukraine does not happen here in the Indo-Pacific. That means understanding what credible and effective deterrence is. And it's to ensure also that the rules, the international law, and the accepted norms are adhered to. And making sure that in this place, we have a series of takeaways and that we study them and then start to apply them. Just here in Japan alone, in the last year, there have been 5 missiles fired by China into Japan's EEZ. Chinese maritime harassment of the Senkaku Islands, both the tempo, the frequency, and the severity of the violations near the Senkaku Islands has increased dramatically. There has been a historic reference to Okinawa and China asserted as the illegitimate territorial claims. There's conducting by China military patrols and exercises and strategic bombers flying over the Sea of Japan rather. Banning Japan's seafood, the arresting of Japan's corporate executives, and as recently as the other day, installing buoys in Japan's EEZ. Now, the United States and Japan stand shoulder to shoulder in a period of time, as I said, adjusting to what is both COVID, conflict, and coercion, and the relationship has evolved from alliance protection to alliance projection. And in this last year and a half, under Prime Minister Kishida, Japan has taken, I think, the proper steps to make sure that deterrence is both credible and effective. Increasing its defense budget, so it will go from the 9th to the 3rd largest in the world at the end of 5 years, up to 2% of GDP. Acquiring certain capabilities like counterstrike. Participating and being a full partner and active shaper of both Camp David and the Camp David principles. I add that, and I want to take one moment aside. A lot of times we only think of deterrence by what you're doing from a military standpoint. Deterrence has multiple dimensions. The diplomatic, development, and defense, all 3 of those. And Camp David was no doubt part of that deterrence. recent U.S., Japan, and Philippine Coast Guard trilateral exercises. As we are sitting here today, 1,200 U.S. soldiers are training alongside 23 Japanese troops in Orient Shield, strengthening the deterrence by enhancing skills in cybersecurity, electronic warfare, and intelligence. Exercise Resolute Dragon and Keen Edge, coming up, will validate operational concepts and reinforce our integrated and multi-domain deterrence. And in the last 2 years, the United States and Japan have dramatically expanded both the scale, the complexity, and the scope of our exercises, and with multiple partners at an unprecedented level. Japan has adopted a CITES law and been a full participant in ensuring and securing the supply chains. Those are just a few items in the last year and a half to ensure that the deterrence is credible and effective. Going forward, the United States and Japan will obviously work on bilateral exercises and training in areas including the Southwest Islands and Senkaku Islands and the mainland of Japan. Obviously, through the trilateral that was achieved in Camp David, since that time, the ministers of defense of the three countries have already been on the phone, and part of that Camp David principle calls for intelligence sharing in real time, military exercises and planning. That too will be part of the deterrence going forward. Optimizing the alliance force posture based on improved operational concepts and enhanced capabilities. Strengthening, again, areas of economic integration with the two countries. But make no doubt about it, we're in a different period of time. And I want to again thank you for this conference today, the opportunity to speak, but to also talk about, from an integrated perspective, how to see coercion, debt trap, and the aggression in the region in a comprehensive whole, what the United States and Japan as partners, our number one ally, not just in the region, but across the globe, in ensuring that our values, our principles, and our shared vision work together in a collaborative way, and making sure that we effectively bring our deterrence up to the level to meet the challenges of the future, so that the international system, the rules-based system, the respect for the sovereignty of other countries is respected. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. So let us move to the discussion dialogue. Professor Michishita, could you go to the very far end, and then Ambassador in the middle? Please sit. Okay, thank you very much for such an insightful and then very strong commitment for U.S.-Japan alliance. And so let me start with, let Dr. Michishita start with his comment, and then in response to the ambassador's remark.
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador Emanuel, for the very intriguing and impressive presentation. We stand really, I felt that the fact that the US and Japan stand together, working together to resist any coercive military economic activities that some countries in this region are kind of taking. So before I offer you some comments, let me talk about one thing that our school, GRIPP's National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, is doing to promote peace and security in this region, in the Indo-Pacific region. So back in 2015, GRIPPS and Japan Coast Guard got together and decided to create a new program called Maritime Safety and Security Policy Program. We call it MSP program, where we bring together up to 10 junior Coast Guard officers from Japan as well as the countries in the Indo-Pacific region. And they come here to study here in Tokyo at this campus for 6 months, and then they will actually move to Kure, where there is a Japan Coast Guard Academy, and they stay there and take a kind of study about a little more practical and professional Coast Guard issues, operational issues for 4 months, and they will come back. And after 1 year, more or less, 1 year of schooling, they would obtain a master's degree. That's the idea. And this year, we had one student from the Maldives, one student from the Philippines, one student from Sri Lanka, one student from India, one student from Indonesia, and 2 students from Japan. And one of them are here, I think, in the audience. Where is he? Raise your hand, stand up. Kazu is from Japan Coast Guard. He's studying in this MSP program. Actually, this program is a part of the Japanese government's effort to provide capacity building assistance to the countries in the Indo-Pacific region. So JICA, Japan International Cooperation Agency, sponsors this program. So the benefit of this is through this program, we are increasing the number of people, specialists, professionals, with whom we share the same value and with whom we can stand together and speak in one voice in support of the values and norms and values that we cherish. So that's what we are doing, and I think one of the things that we can do to resist military as well as economic coercion is to speak, get together and speak in one voice. But my question to Ambassador Emanuel is, what are the other 2 or 3 effective and important means for us of resisting military as well as economic coercion exercised by the countries such as China?
Well, thank you very much. Again, I want to reiterate, I want to thank you for the forum today. And I mean, part of that, the answer is what I talked about. One is no doubt, obviously, as you noted, and I want to just try to draw back a little, you talked about the Coast Guard. I'm doing this by memory, I think in about 4 weeks ago, the United States, Japan, and the Philippines participated in probably the largest Coast Guard exercise. And it's not a coincidence that had a very big impact in the confidence for the Philippines as it went to ensure in the Thomas Shoal Islands that its operation to reinforce as well as resupply the Thomas Shoal Island. So those exercises, you learn skills, you do it, you learn collaboration, you learn from each other, but you also project a level of deterrence that is important to be received. Now, I try to say there, and I always try to repeat this, so let me try to underline it 3 times. Too often in the debate, we limit deterrence to a military definition. I can't stress enough how important it is to understand the Camp David trilateral meeting was also deterrence, because one of China's principles or strategic pillars or assumptions in the region is that the United States, Japan, and Korea can never get on the same page. That was accomplished. Well, that's a deterrence as well. Making sure our supply chains, from semiconductors to EV batteries to the materials that go into EV batteries, are secure is deterrence. Making sure that Japan has a CFIUS law because it has key companies and technologies that you don't want them bought up and then turned against Japan and turned against the United States or allies and alliances. That too is deterrence. And then speaking out on behalf of making sure that when other countries do things that are kind of offsides, they're called out for it. That too is deterrence. So you have to have not a broad definition, an accurate definition, but there's no doubt the capabilities Japan's bringing to its defense, increasing its defense budget, as I said, the capabilities, the exercises that go along with it, the exercises in all parts of Japan, as ensuring that the credibility and the effectiveness of that deterrence. I will also say, which I think should not be lost, when it came to the March 3rd vote in the United Nations condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Japan got on the phone and worked the ASEAN countries, where 80% of the ASEAN countries voted to condemn Russia. 4 of those 8 co-sponsored the resolution. Well, don't think for a second that wasn't noticed by China. That is deterrence. It happens every day in many different ways. Having a vibrant economy, one that's inclusive, is part of deterrence. So I think Japan, I think the United States are doing, what they need to do, but need to do it obviously at a faster pace. But I don't think it should be lost. As I tried to say before, the relationship between the United States and Japan was for years defined as kind of alliance protection. It has flipped to alliance projection into the region to meet the challenges set by China and to ensure that it's projecting a level of effective deterrence, and also not just deterrence, but that it doesn't upset the rules-based system. I have like 7 other things I want to say, but I was going on, so I just stopped there.
That makes sense, because they are using their own version of hybrid warfare vis-a-vis us, and we'll take a hybrid response to that.
Yeah, but I want to draw, that's tactic. Can I say one thing to draw a distinction? True, we're trying to preserve peace and stability. We're not trying to say your islands are our islands. We're not trying to say something about Okinawa. We're not trying to say something about the Himalayan mountains. We're not trying to say something about the islands off of the Philippines. That's different than what China's trying to do. We're talking about peace, stability, respect for the rule of law, respect for established sovereignty. In 2016, the International Court ruled on behalf of the Philippines. China ignored it. There's a big difference about, yes, multidimensional, etc. Maybe certain tactics are similar. I'm not so sure they're all similar. But the objective is very different. One is trying to change and impose a new map on everybody that nobody accepts and everybody objects to, versus what the United States and Japan are trying to do, which is preserve the peace, not use force to change it, and ensure that the region that is so important to global trade, there's stability and respect for the rules. Big difference.
Very much.
Okay, thank you.
Looks
So
like, the left side and the right side of my neck is going to get worse.
thank you so much. So let me ask one question to you. So you talked about the broader deterrence, and I think that sort of eased, I think, Japanese mind, because even though Prime Minister Kishida announced increasing the defense budget and other devised a security document in last December, but still, as you said, full partner, maybe a little insufficient to become a full partner, as maybe the capability is not much to the expectation. And so my question is, how do you do, I mean, like you said, 5 years that we have, maybe defense budget maybe increased to 2%, but what area and how can we improve to meet the U.S. expectations to become a full partner?
Well, let me do 2 things. One is I've left out, but I talked about the UN vote, right? Japan for years and continues to be the #1 investor in the region from a development standpoint, outdoing China. And if you look at, there's been multiple polls not that I may be showing my background a little, but public opinion in the region. Japan is the most popular country in the region. We're popular. Some countries equal to Japan, but Japan in the region, between the United States, China, and Japan, Japan's number one. That quote unquote, I hate the term soft power, even though I love Joseph Nye, but that is effective deterrence. It works when you are popular in a country and you're dealing with the country's government. Because siding up and agreeing to do something with Japan has value. It doesn't mean you're running against public opinion. Not every country is sensitive to it, but a lot of the countries are sensitive to public opinion. That is really important and something we as allies draw on. I can say this as a U.S. ambassador. I don't think if we got on the phone with the ASEAN countries, we would have produced 8 out of 10. That was Japan. Now, to the core part of your question, which was meeting our expectations, I want to just refute one part of that assumption. We have to do certain things also. We're all in this process. If you believe the premise, which I do since I enunciated it, that COVID, the conflict in Ukraine, and the perniciousness of coercion have fundamentally upended people's assumptions and strategic view, we too are in the midst of a massive adjustment. There's expectations of us. Yes, on the defense side, also on the economic side, also on the diplomatic side. And President Biden has been incredibly active in upping the game for that. He's been to Japan twice in the last year. He was just in Vietnam, major announcement. We just had Camp David, which many presidents have worked on, many prime ministers have worked on, many presidents of the Republic of Korea. Significant contribution to the security and stability of the region. The president also, about 2 years ago, announced AUKUS. We've had a major improvement in operational capacity with the Philippines. The region, that is a lot of activity in just 2 years to readjust to the strategic plates that are shifting and moving them in a way that I think significantly enhance our interests. And when I say our, I mean the United States and Japan. And both the Japan and the United States are doing it in partnership, doing it in lockstep. And so when you say, what does Japan have to do to meet the United States expectations? I think that's on both of us of bringing a new and improved game. And one of the things that I would say that underpins it, that I shouldn't forget, our strength as the United States is allies and alliances. That's why Camp David stands out. That's why the multi-dimensional exercises we do stand out, whether they include Australia, whether they include the Philippines, whether they include Great Britain, whether they include different countries like the Coast Guard exercise with Japan, Philippines, and the United States. The idea that there's multiple countries involved has its own level and capacity to bring kind of a quality to the quantity of countries involved.
Thank you. So, may I have another question? Maybe final question before opening to the public. As you talked about the partners and Quad and AUKUS, that I think it's very difficult to just challenge this difficulty just by one, or two of us. Maybe we need more partners. So how do you want to see those regional partnership? Quad or ROK Japan-US relationship has been much, much better these days. So how do you see, how do you want to see those partners and then allied together, not only Japan and US, but more different countries in the region together?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing is to look, Japan and the United States have a unique partnership. And I say that because it's not only a treaty ally, not only the fact that here in Japan, one of the largest military presence by the United States in any one individual country is here. For the last 4 years, the United States was the #1 direct foreign investor in Japan, and Japan was that for the United States 4 consecutive years. So that partnership is unique. Japan has a history, like the United States, on building alliances, allies, and working with friends. That is essential because while China can sometimes want to push away the international court, they are very sensitive to international public opinion. And building that kind of web of allies and alliances, whether it's on the military front, on critical minerals, whether on supply chain, whether on in behalf of other type of development in other countries. I mean, take the Philippines. Japan's the largest investors in the Philippines. It's a significant piece of Philippines' economic development, Japan's diplomatic and development diplomacy, and it bears direct fruit on one of the most important things that we're all trying to accomplish, that the South China Sea does not change from a use of force basis.
Okay, so I think people are patient, be asking questions. So let me open up to the...
Patience is not one of my strong suits.
Open up to the Q&A from the floor. And we have 2 stands of the microphone there. So if you have any questions, please line up. And then for the press people, because you have a huddle session after this, so please hold your question.
Yeah, that's a huddle.
Huddle.
Yeah,
okay.
no.
Sorry, that was the first time that I saw this term. So that's, sorry for my mispronunciation.
Mm-hmm.
So whoever like to ask question to Ambassador, please. And then please switch on the microphone. Thank you. And then please have a name and affiliation.
Good afternoon. Mark Kawai. I work for Zimmer Biomet, a U.S. medical device company. First of all, thank you very much for spending time with us this afternoon. And as the co-chair of the ACCG Healthcare Committee and also a person who serves multiple roles at the U.S. Medical Device Industry Associations, really appreciate the strong support from the embassy, the continued strong support from the embassy. I was wondering if you can touch a little bit on sharing your view on Made in China 2025.
Go ahead, use your outdoor voice. Use your outdoor voice.
Yeah, I see number of healthcare products on the top of your list, and there's also other products on their list from economic security, not only from economic security point of view, but also from healthcare security point of view. Touch a little bit around that. Thank you.
Yeah, I am not. First of all, Mark, thank you for the question. Thank you for. So, I have not seen the full comprehensive list of Made in China 2025, but 3 things that I think are very, very important. And it goes back to the first thing you mentioned, COVID and the conflict. I added coercion. But in the COVID, there was a restriction on some very important medical supplies as it related to the world, from gowns and gloves and masks, etc. I think there's an active review right now when you look at what I would call supply chain. A lot of people think of it from a semiconductor basis, but there's no doubt, there's another microphone that might work better. There's no doubt that you have to look at the materials that are used and important for pharmaceutical products. They're part of the supply chain that you have to secure. That's an active conversation. I don't know from a production and medical device basis, but I can say from a biotech basis, China has, if you added AI, cyber, quantum, they've no doubt set a goal as it relates to biotechnology, new medicines. There's a very interesting article today in the Washington Post about trying to get DNA samples from around the world, that we have to, as all of us, both from medical gowns to mapping the genome project and everything between, be conscious of the decision they've made, take them at their word, and up our both offense and defensive of protecting ourselves, investing in our future, and continue to have our leadership in the biopharma space, medical research. Yours very clearly medical device. That's a critical part to it. I want to be careful, made in China 2025, because I don't know the whole list, but in the area of medicine or healthcare, we know enough coming out of COVID that we have a lot of work for our own security. And when I say ours, I don't mean just the United States. I mean all of ours.
Interest of time, would you mind have a question all together, three together, and then Ambassador will
okay.
answer all of together.
Yeah, all the answers maybe not be in the same order as the questions.
Okay, please.
I can hear you.
Executive Director of the International Energy Agency and ISEF. Thank you, Ambassador, last year to come to the ISEF session on the nuclear. My question is again the nuclear power. I cannot agree more about the deterrence among the three countries, Japan, Korea, and US. And Camp David is really a good start. And nuclear power should be part of it, I guess. One is the area which your Argonne National Laboratory is developing integral fast reactor is one. Another one which I want to give some thought on you today is the cooperation among Japan, Korea, US on the nuclear propulsion submarine. Okay. Northeast Asian version of AUKUS is needed. If Japan buying 400 Tomahawks, we need place to deploy, and we need nuclear submarine. I think this is the most strategic deterrence against North Korea, China, and Russia. What is your view on this?
I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. That's my view on that. But it's a great, let me say this. I credit, as I've said before, Japan's decision to increase the defense budget to meet the this situation that they're here in the region. Their decision to do counterstrike. I'm not touching on a 10-foot pole what you said. If you want to talk to the Japanese government about nuclear subs, I can get you a phone number. I'm not doing that. Two is our original discussion when I spoke at your conference is the importance of nuclear energy and most importantly SMRs in meeting our climate goals. And there are 4 companies in the United States that are the small, medium-sized nuclear. In 2 of those 4, the Japanese companies are the investors. And to get from here to there on meeting both energy security and climate objectives and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, you can't do it without nuclear energy and specifically SMRs. Go ahead. Was that short enough? Okay.
Thank you, Ambassador Emanuel. My name is Ida. I'm a member of American-Japan Society and going to apply to this graduate institute.
I'll write you a letter of recommendation. Hopefully it will help.
But I don't know if I pass or not. My question is, could you talk about a little bit human rights diplomacy and domestic legal system to help Japan become better democracy, and like Magnitsky Act. The reason I ask you this question, recent years, semi-democracy countries have become increasingly authoritarian. Authoritarian countries have become increasingly authoritarian by dictators. And I think Russia and China are leading the way while looking at Japanese democracy. So I believe that Japan has large responsibility for this trend. And although your country may not perfect example of a democracy country, but I thank you.
Thank you for the question. Look, there's a long history for Japan. And to be totally honest and frank, and I think that's the only way to have a conversation, is we, on our foreign policy, have had good days and bad days. and we have a long history from going from realpolitik, swinging back to whether it's, you look at Jimmy Carter's history, Woodrow Wilson, where our ideals and our views of human rights are elevated. But on the other hand, I think if you look at like the Helsinki, when human rights were advocated in our relationship with the Soviet Union, it played an important role in the long-term basis. So, but I want to be clear, when you did a scorecard of the United States and its execution of its foreign policy, sometimes human rights are at the top. Sometimes some people think we take a more pragmatic approach of how do we apply it, and we're more kind of scattershot, and we have to be consistent in that. But I do think, and I'm glad you asked this question because I want to do one other thing. A lot of times people think, as your question revealed, that human rights is over here, and as President Biden has, I think, eloquently and forcefully advocated for a rules-based system, a system based on accepted international norms and et cetera, that somehow that's not human rights. Go ask a country that's been invaded whether that's not part of human rights. Go ask a country that has had its political and economic independence restricted in so many other coercive ways, whether that's not also part of human rights. So I don't think it should be bifurcated. I actually think standing up for the international law, for a rules-based system that's applied universally and across the board, and ensuring that countries are held to that standard as captured in the United Nations, that too is part of human rights. It's not just a separate categories of free speech, religious freedom, etc. It's integrally involved in that. You had a question? Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Yes, final question, please.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Emanuel, for your thought-provocative speech today at GRIPS. And my name is Diu, a second-year PhD student at GRIPS. And my question for you is, in your opinion, how should Japan-Taiwan relations be structured to meet the necessary level of deterrence against China? And how do you see your role as U.S. ambassador to Japan in building that kind of relationship between Taiwan and Japan? Thank you.
Well, I don't think we have time to answer that. Thanks for the question. Thank you for the question, but let me say, first of all, I'm not going to comment on what Japan and Taiwan will do. That's not appropriate. The president has announced, and you know the country, we have a policy. And I think given all the relationships, et cetera, and less said here, the better. Our policy has been consistent. There hasn't been a change in the policy. I think as it relates to stability, peace, not changing any any level of what is respected norms or the sovereignty or independence of an individual country. I think making sure, and I go back to the core part of what I said, deterrence matters. The lesson, I think, between 2007 and Putin's speech at Munich to what happened in Crimea in 2014 and then 2021 on the Ukrainian border of the main part of Ukraine. Those are important years to study as much as what's happening on the battlefield. And I believe bringing a level of credibility and effectiveness to our deterrence in the full scope of I've discussed here is what's important. And I'm not going to, hope you understand and respect why I won't talk about what Japan should be doing with Taiwan. Okay? But thank you for the question. I want to close where I started. I want to thank you for the opportunity to give out my third and final speech to talk about coercion, the death trap, and most importantly, the regional security of the situation, why I think and how China's trying to change that unilaterally, and what we all together can do to meet China's aggression from an effective deterrence standpoint. Thank you.
Thank you.